So Max Verstappen won the 2023 Formula 1 Canadian Grand Prix and extended his lead in the championship to 69 points. Now in this video, we are not here to talk about what happened in the race. We'll start doing a feature on that as well. That is something I have in line for the future. For now, this video is entirely about the drivers and how they fared during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. In this video, we are going to rate how all 20 drivers on the Formula 1 grid fared during the Canadian Grand Prix. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. Now, first of all, let's start with Red Bull. First off, we have Max Verstappen. Now, I think it's safe to say that it's about time we stop putting the entire success of Max Verstappen this season on the car. Let's be fair. Looking at how Sergio Perez has done in the last 3 races, it's safe to say that the driver is making a lot of difference and he's the one that is bringing the results. I mean, there have been far too many occasions where it said, okay, the car was too quick. But looking at the last few races, looking at the race in Monaco, where it was Max Verstappen who pulled out the lap that ultimately got him pole position. Then even in Canada, where in conditions that were not only challenging, but that were just baiting every driver to make a mistake. Leclerc and Perez did, as we all saw. Even in those conditions, Max did not make a mistake. And that is why he won the race. Ultimately, when we talk about Max and his Canadian Grand Prix weekend, it was vintage performance from him once again. He was flawless in qualifying, he was flawless in race, and well, now he's just cruising to the championship. And I honestly feel he might even be hoping that either Aston Martin or Mercedes, they start getting closer to him so that at least he can have some competition and some fun during the races. In terms of rating him, he gets a rating of 10 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Now let's talk about Sergio Perez, and I mean, I don't even know what to say. The way he has been performing in qualifying has been awful. This time around, though, it was not only qualifying, it was the race as well. Perez had no pace to compete with at any stage of the race, and something that should concern him and Red Bull as well, because at the end of the day, if only one driver is going to perform, that is not the kind of situation Red Bull wants to find itself in. Well, to be honest, I did feel that Perez would do well in Canada because of the presence of traction zones. There were quite a few, but somehow he did not. And you take these things into consideration, you see he is now very low in confidence, and Max has he's dominating the Red Bull team right now, and these are not good signs. More importantly though, well, for Sergio, Fernando Alonso is coming and he needs to sort things out, because if Alonso starts beating him even more regularly and usurps him in the championship, it's not going to look good. So yes, when it comes to the Canadian Grand Prix, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 from my side. Now moving to Ferrari, first of all, let's talk about Charles Leclerc. Well, qualifying, I think it was just a mess up overall. He made the call to switch to slicks. Ferrari did not hear. There is some fault that lies with Leclerc as well, because the lap that he did on the intermediates, it was not good enough. And Sainz was able to get through with his lap on the intermediates. Now coming to the race, it was arguably as flawless in execution as you can expect from a Ferrari team. And yeah, a P4 result was good if you take a look at where he started the race. However, if you look at the entire big picture, I feel Leclerc could have challenged for the podium if there was no mess up in qualifying, and yeah, he should be a bit disappointed with how the weekend went. So yes, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 8 out of 10 for the Canadian GP weekend. Now talking about Carlos, and well, let's be fair about one thing. When it comes to impeding Pierre Gasly, he had a role to play as well. That was something that he should own up to instead of whatever comments he made after the session. Yeah, overall, I think this was one of the races where Carlos was very competitive with Leclerc. The pace was not, he wasn't too far behind. At the end of the day, good, decent execution from his side as well. He should be a bit pissed, because just like Leclerc, maybe even he had a chance to fight for the podium. But yeah, overall, still positive from Sainz, because now he's starting to be competitive against Leclerc, and that is arguably the first step that he needs to take at Ferrari. Overall, if I have to give him a rating, I give him a rating of 7 out of 10. Now moving to Mercedes, and first of all, let's talk about Lewis Hamilton. Not talking about Lewis, I think he's slowly getting in that particular vein of form that he tends to enjoy at Mercedes. That was a characteristic of him even during the Mercedes dominance years. He was very impressive in qualifying, didn't really make any mistake. His start was brilliant, he got the jump on Alonso. And yeah, again, a P3 result is arguably the best that was possible with the Mercedes. There is one thing though, and I'm not sure many people have even talked about it, but I feel he could have been more aggressive against Alonso when it comes to defending the inside line. Maybe there was a possibility that he could have kept him behind, because what Albon showed later in the race was that it's not easy to overtake in Canada, and maybe Lewis could have done better on that front. So yes, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 9 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Next up, we have George Russell. Now talking about George, well, the qualifying was, well, decent. He was right behind Lewis, not too much of a gap between the two drivers. It was the race that was arguably another poor mistake from his side. And to be honest, this season there have been quite a few of them. He made a mistake in Monaco, he made a mistake in Barcelona, and now it is the third race where he has done that. Somewhere down the line, Lewis is starting to stretch things out a bit inside Mercedes. And for a driver that was aiming to be Lewis Hamilton's successor, that's not a good thing. So yes, something for Russell to work on. In terms of rating, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Now moving to Alpine, first of all, let's talk about Esteban Ocon. Now overall, it was a decent weekend from him once again. He brought home the points, something that he's doing with consistency now. And in terms of qualifying, I think it was the best that he could have done. Maybe the final lap he could have, just like Hülkenberg, he could have probably pushed the car a bit ahead. In the end, it wouldn't have made a difference because the Alpine is just not in the same league as the top 4 cars in terms of race pace. Coming to the race, mostly he did the job. The second stop, I feel it was a bit unnecessary. He dropped him behind Albon and he was not able to overtake him. I do feel that maybe that dangling rear wing had a role to play, because whatever I saw in the telemetry as well, Ocon was not making much of an impression on the two straights where there was DRS. The first DRS that was in the sector 2, he was still able to close a bit, but that was more due to traction. But in the second and third, the main straights, he hardly made an impression. And arguably the rear wing played a role. And when it comes to rating the entire weekend for Ocon, I give him a rating of 8 out of 10 because, well, he's keeping things consistent at Alpine. It's not too flashy and it's not too many mistakes. So yeah, an 8 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Now talking about Pierre Gasly, and unfortunately for him, his entire weekend was ruined by that impeding incident from Carlos Sainz in qualifying, getting eliminated in Q1. It's not ideal and it hurt him badly, because in the race, I think this is something that we've seen a lot, because the midfield is very competitive. You tend not to make up too many places. The same thing happened with Gasly, and we all saw he couldn't really score any points. So yeah, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 6 out of 10, and we'll be hoping for a better qualifying session at Austria. Now next up, we have Lando Norris, and it was, to be honest, it was a vintage Lando Norris weekend. He pretty much maximized the qualifying, did the same in the race. That overtake on Oscar Piastri was making a statement there. Let's be very honest about that, because I don't think he liked the fact that his teammate had jumped him on the start. He should have been just behind Esteban Ocon and should have finished P9. I think he would have been P9 in that case. But the penalty, it's a useless penalty, to be honest. We've seen far worse cases of drivers slowing down unnecessarily and not getting penalized. Overall, if we have to rate Norris's weekend, he gets a rating of 8 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Now let's talk about Oscar Piastri. Well, in my view, I think we are not too far away from the point where Oscar starts challenging Norris consistently. That is my view, because whatever I've seen in the last couple of races, he's learned, he's grown, and he's starting to understand how to get the maximum out of the McLaren. It was evident in the race and in qualifying as well. Of course, he made a mistake, and that should not have happened. But yes, it's still early days for him. Overall, if I have to rate his weekend, I'm being a bit generous. I'm rating him 7.5 out of 10. Precisely because he's actually challenging Lando Norris, a driver that is, in my view, one of the elite drivers in F1 right now. So yes, a 7.5 out of 10. And keep an eye on Oscar Piastri. This season he's going to put together at least a couple of drives that are going to make people stand up and notice that maybe we've got another future talent in our hands. Next up, we have Valtteri Bottas, and I'm very happy to see Bottas put together an impressive weekend. He was decent in qualifying. He did a brilliant job, scored points in the race as well. Overall, a decent weekend, and honestly just thrashed Zhou Guanyu this time around. So yes, a rating of 8 out of 10 as he scores points with Alfa Romeo once again. Now talking about Zhou Guanyu, and in my view, this has just been the story of his career throughout. Even throughout his junior career, he has done the same thing. He has put together one race where he makes everyone stand up and take notice of how impressive he can be. Then by the very next race, he's back to being, well, mediocre. That's just how Joe has been. He's not been consistent throughout his career. That has been his biggest flaw. And that is, personally, I feel that is something that's going to cost him a race seat in the future. So yeah, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 4 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Next up, we have Fernando Alonso from Aston Martin, and I mean, it was Alonso back to his vintage best. The qualifying was very impressive, arguably the only one that got close to Max Verstappen throughout the session, because Ferraris, well, they did what Ferrari does most of the times. Other than that, I think even in the race, he arguably being on the dirty side of the track, it hurt Alonso a bit. He didn't get the best start. From that point onwards, his racecraft was very impressive. The way he overtook Lewis, I mean, the kind of aggression he showed throughout when he was pretty much hounding Lewis. And, when you see such kind of driving, someone who is completely on the edge all the time, it's brilliant to watch. And then he's 41 years of age. We are just privileged to watch Lewis and Alonso drive at such an advanced age and drive so well. So yeah, overall it was fun to watch. He's coming for Sergio Perez, that's for sure. And maybe a 33rd win. I think he'll get it this season, I hope. I don't want to jinx it, but I feel it's just around the corner now. So yeah, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 9 out of 10. Because arguably, in my view, I've reserved the 10 rating for Max in this particular case, because he was on a different level to almost everyone else. Now moving to Lance Stroll. Well, Lance scored points, but other than that, he didn't really do much. It's a poor qualifying, a poor race. I think this is how it's going to be at Aston, and I feel bad for Lance that he has Alonso as a teammate, someone who is also politically very sound, because that was something that Seb was not, and that is where I think Seb lost out a bit. Overall, he gets a rating of 3 out of 10 in my view. There was nothing that I can look at and say that I was impressed from Lance in any which way. Now next up we have Nico Hülkenberg, and yeah, I'm a huge Nico Hülkenberg fan, and I was happy to see him once again take the Haas to the front row. It was a very impressive performance. Of course, there was luck involved because of the red flag and everything, but he deserves it, to be honest. The kind of driving he was putting together in a Haas, it deserves the kind of results that he's producing. Now, once again, what happened in the race was expected. I don't think anyone was surprised by now. That is just how the Haas performs these days. Overall, I think he has proven how well he can perform in a Formula 1 car. He's completely smashed Kevin Magnussen by now. And yes, arguably, maybe he has a few years left in Formula 1. In terms of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, he gets a rating of 9 out of 10 for the entire weekend. Now, talking about Kevin Magnussen, he's been completely outclassed by Hülkenberg, a driver that has not raced in Formula 1 full-time for almost 3 years now. 20, 21, 22. 3 years. Hülkenberg has not been in F1, and he is outclassing Magnussen, someone who secured a pole position last season. These are not good signs, and not much to say, to be honest. Just, I think it's safe to say that if Haas had any semblance of race pace in that car, we would be seeing Hülkenberg score points consistently, while Magnussen continue to struggle. So yeah, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 for the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, and arguably another average outing for the Danish driver. Now moving to AlphaTauri, first let's talk about Yuki Tsunoda. Now talking about Yuki, I feel he was a bit limited with the kind of car that he had. AlphaTauri didn't have much space in Canada, and that showed. He was better than Nick De Vries. To be honest, not much to say about Yuki's weekend. He gets a rating of 6.5 out of 10 in Canada. Now moving to Nick De Vries, well, I don't think I'll be surprised if De Vries is fired from AlphaTauri before the end of the season. He's making incremental growth when it comes to closing down Yuki Tsunoda. But again, the problem is there is no statement-making performance from him. And then the kind of mistakes that he's making, the error in the wheel-to-wheel battle with Kevin Magnussen was disappointing. Something that you don't expect, at least at this level. So yes, overall he gets a rating of 3 out of 10, and it's critical. Now he needs to start performing. Now moving to Williams, and first of all, let's talk about Alex Albon. Well, arguably the star of the weekend. His call to move to slick tires in Q2 was inspired. That was a very impressive call that he made. If he had not made that call, he was not going through to Q3, and if he had not, he would not have set up his weekend to secure points. Then in the race, he is a Thai minister of defense, whatever you want to call him. Very impressive. The way he was able to, not make mistakes, keep things almost perfect when it comes to choosing the breaking points. It was very impressive job from him, and P7 is a well-deserved result. And yeah, I mean, I don't see him making any mistakes, at least in Canada. And when it comes to rating, he gets a rating of 10 out of 10, because other than Max, it was arguably Albon that shined throughout the Canadian GP weekend. Now let's talk about Logan Sargent, and well, he needs to start performing. One of the biggest things is, okay, we can agree that he's still a rookie. He needs some time to adapt. The problem is he's not showing the kind of development that Oscar Piastri is showing right now. Oscar has been able to consistently be within a tenth of Lando Norris now in the last few races. Logan has not done that. And if I'm being honest, Norris is arguably a bigger benchmark than Alex Albon right now. So that is also a concerning thing. Secondly, the crashes have been a bit much from Logan. We didn't have any this time around, but overall, if the pace is not there, it's going to hurt. Then we have these rumors of Mick Schumacher making a comeback and replacing Logan. The signs are not looking good. Logan needs to start performing, because if he does not get his act together, there are replacements being lined up. So yeah, in terms of rating, in the Canadian Grand Prix, he gets a rating of 4 out of 10. But yes, he needs to start performing now. So now that we are done with rating the entire grid, let's take a look at the most interesting part for me in the entire video, and that is the cumulative rankings after the first 8 races. At the top, I don't think it's much of a surprise. We have Max Verstappen on top. We have Fernando Alonso at second, and then we have Lewis Hamilton. Now, Lewis was not this high until the last 2-3 races, and in the last 2-3 races, his consistency and arguably very, very impressive level of performance has seen him jump to P3 in the rankings. At P4, I think it's a bit of a surprise. Esteban Ocon is in P4. Well, one of the reasons why he is in P4 is because throughout the entire season, he's pretty much maintained a median level of performance, other than arguably the race in Monaco, where that was him punching above the weight of the car. Other than that particular race, he has been able to produce decent results almost every weekend, and that has helped him reach this point. Then we have Yuki Tsunoda in P5. Arguably didn't have that good a race this time around, but he continues to hold his position. George Russell has dropped from P3 to P6. Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Nico Hülkenberg. Now these are the drivers, now except maybe Nico Hülkenberg before the start of the season. I didn't expect him to perform this well. But other than him, other drivers, they are the usual suspects. You expect these drivers to be there in the top 10. Now, arguably the surprises, for me, it is Sergio Perez in P14. Sergio Perez ranking 14th in the driver rankings, especially when he's supposed to be driving the fastest car on the grid and fighting for the title. You can just see the kind of gulf that is there between him and his teammate, or arguably any other driver on the grid, to be honest. Him being ranked 14th, it just shows how poorly he has done this season. Then in P17, we have Lance Stroll, and another example of a driver that is underperforming massively, especially if we compare it to the car that he has at his disposal. I think something that needs to be talked about a bit is the fact that the last 2 slots are reserved for the rookies. Both Logan Sargent and Nick De Vries are 19th and 20th right now. And arguably this is something that needs to be pointed out, because fine, they are rookies and they are not going to beat their teammates from the very first race and in their very first season. But what is lacking from these rookies has been the level of growth and development that you expect from them. It has been lacking both from Logan as well as from Nick. And especially if you compare it with Oscar Piastri, a driver that has shown a level of improvement race by race. So yeah, something to keep an eye on, because both Logan and Nick are in danger of losing their seats by the end of the season. So yeah, these were the cumulative rankings and the driver ratings for the 2023 Canadian Grand Prix. Do let me know what you think. What are your ratings? And will you rate someone differently than what I have? Drop your views in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.